Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Delta Report. Now, this is a Sunday, and I'm just kind of kicking back around the house. Uh, we're all in this thing where, we're kind of stuck at home a lot because of the COVID thing, you know. And I wanted to talk theoretically to you guys. I wanted to talk theoretically about what I think about something called Moore's Law. And, you guys can see the progression of Moore's Law if you watch what's been happening with computers. You know, going back, like if you will go back into the 1980s, we didn't really have an internet then. It's hard to imagine life, to tell you the truth, without an internet. But back in the mid 80s, most people operated their whole life without an internet, without the cell phones, without all the gizmos and everything. But uh, I got interested in computers in the late 1990s, probably around, I think it was around 1998, something like that, and I wanted to get my first computer. I didn't really know that much about them or the internet, to tell you the truth. And so I saved up some money. And my gosh, computers were expensive back in those days. I remember I went into the Staples store here in Halifax, and they had a whole bunch of computers there. And they were big, computers back then were big, like they were these big metal boxes. And they were all really expensive, and I didn't really understand the processor speeds or anything like that. I didn't, and I picked out one that seemed to me to be the best looking one for the cheapest price, because I was kind of price conscious, but it was like I think $1,150. And our purchasing power back then, back around before the year 2000, you could buy an awful lot more with $1,150 than you can buy right now, I'll tell you. But I remember back then you used to be able to go into the grocery store here in Canada, and for $50 you could fill up a whole shopping cart right to the brim of food. You know that little place in the shopping cart, in the back of the shopping cart, where the kids sit? Now for $50, that's what you fill. That little place where the kids sit, in the back of the cart. But back then you could fill up the whole shopping cart with food for $50. And so I spent $1,150 on this computer. Time taxes was out the door. I think it was like $1,300 for it. I brought it home. And the hard drive used to make a clickety click 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 sound, and it had a really big, huge, monstrous hard drive on it. 40 gigabytes. Okay, the processor was really fast on this one too. I think it was running at it was a single core processor running at somewhere around 400 megahertz, I think it was. So I wanted to get the internet. The only thing available here was a dial-up connection on a 56K modem, and it used to make these sounds like beep 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 when it was connecting, the modem and the computer. And I went online, right? And it was like if you wanted to download a page, just a picture, just an ordinary picture. It took like 2 minutes. It would do like each pixel to a time, like you could see the picture would be coming in. And it was a novelty, just to be able to download something like a picture off of the internet. Of course, what kind of pictures I would like is girls in bikinis and stuff like that. But anyway, it was fun. It was fun being able to go online, and what they back in those days they called surf the internet. Actually, what's called surf the internet. There's all kinds of stuff out there, different sites, but it's all text. You know. So then I had that first computer for a while. It started to act up, and I got really curious. And this is the kind of person I am. My mother always said when I was a little kid, she used to give me a pen, and I'd tear the pen all to pieces, take the spring out of it, and take the and put it all back together again. Well, that's what I ended up doing with this computer. I tore the thing all into its down to each individual component, took every component out of the thing, and then put it all back together again, and then started it up, and it functioned fine. And I learned where all the pieces, and they used to have these ribbon cables, straight full of ribbon cables. Had to remember where every ribbon cable went, and everything, uh, where every wire went, And so I put it all back together, and again, it functioned fine. And I must have did that 5 or 6 times, and so then I started getting involved in this thing where you can build your own computer. They used to call them rigs back then. So I wanted to build my own rig, and I was going to build an AMD. And so that's what I did. I built an AMD, and I noticed the processor was a little bit faster. It's fast enough where I could start playing games on it and things like that. The first one I built, actually built myself. And I bought the parts from a store here in Halifax called Robotnik. I went in there and I bought all the parts. This was right around 2002, 2003. And that had a single core processor. It was quite a bit faster. It was a 64-bit single core processor. And it was fast enough to play games and stuff. Well, then I only had that for about 6 months, and I just yearned to build another one. So I built one, and I wanted to have a dual core processor, an AMD. I think it must have been about 2003, 2004. Paid a lot of money for that computer too. Put it all together and everything, and it functioned fine. And so about every 6 months or every year, I always wanted to build a new computer. I had this thing. The newer parts kept coming out, and newer and better and stronger, and had more. And so I go out and I always build a little bit better rig, and went from 400 megahertz to 800 megahertz, then to 1.2 megahertz, and as I was advancing there, about every 6 months or a year, building a new computer, eventually I was getting up near 3 megahertz. I mean gigahertz on the processor, and a dual core, and next thing you know, a triple core, and finally in the end I was building quad cores, and this is Moore's Law, guys. This is how it functions. And it's still functioning. Every so many months, the computers are doubling in their power and efficiency. And this is going to continue. Now, also, these video games are getting, you notice that they're getting more complex, and they're looking more and more realistic. They're progressing in the same function of Moore's Law. When things are really going to start to pick up and function much faster is instead of us designing the processors, instead of us designing the video games, and now they have what's called graphics engines in the video games that simulate physics in our reality. These are physics engines and graphics engines in the video games. Different companies are making different ones, and the computers are actually starting to instead of a programmer programming, the initial programmer programs the what's the sets in the different physics engines for these computers that generate a game world. They call it a game world in these video games. This simulates the reality in our physical world that exists right here. Okay, so in a video game, like one game example of this would be like maybe Red Dead Redemption, or The Witcher 3 is another game maybe you could think of, or Grand Theft Auto 5. In games like that, they have a game world, and they have simulated the physics of real reality, simulated physics. They always have to have a base reality in order to simulate from. So they simulate from base reality, in a physics engine the physics of base reality in a simulation. This is what they do. And the simulation is going to increase its speed of Moore's law. In other words, it's going to get better and better and better, progressively faster when they let the computers start to take over the simulation instead of a computer programmer doing the simulation. So what they'll do is they'll create a program that the computer can then use that program to run the simulations itself on a massive scale. And through the function of Moore's law, with the computers getting faster and faster, we're going to move in a direction where the computers are going to constantly be doubling their computing power. Next, we're going to move into something called quantum computing, where the computers don't double their computing power anymore. They magnify it by 100,000 times more powerful. And we're on the verge of AI, artificial intelligence. So you get artificial intelligence combined with quantum computing, then the power of Moore's law takes off even faster. And what it works toward is these simulations become more and more, instead of a simulation, they become more and more real in their this is what they shoot for in these simulations, is realism. So we had a game come out quite recently called Cyberpunk 2077. Everybody was waiting for it because they thought that the simulation was going to be so much more advanced than other games that have been made 5-10 years ago. But it turns out that it wasn't. That it fell short of expectations to a certain degree. But that doesn't mean that the simulations are going to move backwards. We will see these simulations or simulated worlds become more and more advanced. Now, what are we doing with these simulations right now at this point in time? What we're doing is we're looking at a two-dimensional screen, and our mind gets, or our thoughts, or our mind gets involved in the simulation. And some of these simulations are so realistic that as our mind gets involved in the simulation, we start to lose a little bit of, just a little bit, of our perception of the world, especially kids, when they get really involved in these simulations. They start to lose a little bit of the perceptions of real reality that we're actually in, the physical world that we're actually in here. Right? But we're going to advance toward this to a certain point where, and they're already doing this, wearing these 3D head visors and stuff, that they want to immerse themselves in the simulation rather than just looking at it on a two-dimensional screen. So what's the next step in this? Well, our consciousness has to be conscious of something. And how we're conscious of something is through our senses. So we have sight, we have hearing, we have touch, taste, smell, these different senses. These are called the senses. And what this does is it creates a data input that it goes into our brain, and we're able to analyze that input, and that's what we're conscious of. So our consciousness is directly connected to the data input, right, from our senses. Now, with an altered data input, in other words, if right now what we're senses of, what we're sensing and what we're conscious of is the data that's coming in from this real world, if you cut off that, if you looked at that like a freeway, so the data's the cars going down the freeway, that's the data that we're conscious of. If you were to put a cutoff for that data so that that data couldn't come in, the data from the real world couldn't come in. And if you were to inject some sort of a chip or something, implant some sort of a chip, so that instead of receiving that data into our conscious mind from the real world, we would receive the data from a simulated world. kind of like an off-ramp in the freeway or whatever. So I'll tell you, kind of like more like trains. You know how a train goes down the tracks, and they'll have these things called a switcher thing. The guy can pull the switch, and the train will go off on a different set of tracks. Well, if our consciousness coming in, it's like that train. That's the information. The information train, the stream of information from our eyes. Our eyes are like cameras, sending an information stream. Our ears, the data's coming in the audio track. That's our audio track coming in. You know, our touch, sense of touch is very all similar, but it all forms into that one big stream of data that's coming in. If you were to switch that data, like you switch a train off the tracks, and end that data flow, and then enter a new data flow coming in from a computer chip, probably directly implanted into your brain, well, then you could have a new set of data that's coming in that the computer's creating from a simulation. By doing this, you could possibly do away with the video screen that you look at to play a video game, and you'd have an immersive game where you would actually be in this game world, but it would actually be a data stream that would be being controlled by the computer. If you understand. And as soon as you made that switch, and you stopped that data from coming in from the real world, from our senses and everything else, and you start that other data stream coming in from the computer, everything would be controlled by the computer. You'd be in the computer's world. Or possibly controlled by you. Or possibly you could have that control given up to the computer. But the real point I want to make is as we start entering into quantum computing, and they get these physics engines that they've been working on down to the point where they can simulate real reality in every minute detail, you could enter into this world through a computer implant, have your regular world switched off completely, so that you'd be almost like you're in a state of a coma, but the new information stream would start, and you would suddenly find yourself not looking at a two-dimensional screen to play a video game, but inside the game world. Inside the game simulation. To the point where you would not be able to tell that you were inside a game simulation. You would even feel pain. You could feel pleasure. You could, it would all be simulated directly into your, and this data stream would be coming from quantum computers, not from these old-fashioned computers. And these quantum computers would be probably in the order of hundreds of thousands of times more powerful. And so you'd be hard-pressed to tell whether you were really in real reality or you were in a simulation, because the simulation would be so real and so immersive, and you would be inside it. Everything you hear, everything you touch, everything you smell, everything you taste in the simulation would be all computer controlled, but you wouldn't know that it was computer controlled. You could lose contact with the real reality inside a simulation, and in fact live your life out inside a simulation. Now, this is where we're going with Moore's Law. And the thing is all of this is going to be advanced and sped up much, much faster than it is now, because the way it is now, computer programmers and stuff have to do all these things manually. But once the computer starts to do the computer programming and everything through artificial intelligence, it could move at a pace. So we've been having Moore's Law, like back when I first started computing and stuff, up till now, but it's moving at a very, very slow pace. But all of a sudden, with this new technology coming along, like quantum computing, combined with artificial intelligence, this could go so fast that we could be looking at these computer simulations, in other words, computer games, that we could get lost in probably within the next 20 years or less. Computer simulations that are just as big as this world that we're in right now and just as complex. The atoms all generated by computer. And your mind wouldn't be able to tell the difference between those and real atoms. And yes, the computer could even control things like pain. So in these computer generated worlds, if you get something happen to you, uh, I'll just use a simple example, as if maybe if you were opening a tin can to cook yourself some dinner in the computer simulated world and your hand slipped and you cut your finger. You would see the blood and you'd feel the pain, and you would really believe that you were really been cut. Your finger had really been cut. And you really would go over and bandage it. You would be actually quite literally living in a simulation and at a certain point, would you even know that you were in a simulation? And the next question is, about all this is, when you're in the simulation, could the data stream that the computer's feeding you through this simulated chip, could that data stream be feeding you the information at a much greater speed than it does here in the real world? So that you could live out, I don't know, maybe 5 years in the simulation, and you come back into the real world here and only an hour's taken place in this world. So in other words, you would jack into this simulation. I don't know, maybe even maybe they could do it wirelessly. So you just sit down at your computer and turn your desktop on. You go and you'd enter into the simulation you wanted to go into. Or maybe by that time we'd have it, maybe 20 years from now, you'd have it so you'd just tell your computer housemaid, Alexa, simulation number 5433, please. And Alexa would say, the process has begun. Lean back in your chair, shut your eyes, and now enter into the simulation. And boom! This world would disappear. It'd be just like you went into a coma. Just like somebody knocked you out. And then you wake up, and you'd be in a computer world that would appear every bit as real as this world to you. And, of course, you wouldn't know the difference. But you'd be in there because the data stream could possibly be so much faster downloading directly into your cerebral cortex. You're sitting in your chair, but you don't know you're in the chair. You're in this maybe a fantasy world where you are Adam and you're walking around trying to find Eve, and you're walking naked through the jungle or whatever, and eating fruit off of trees and stuff, and you're in there for 5 whole years. Playing around, swimming in the pool with Eve and stuff, and eating grapes, her feeding you grapes and stuff like that, and you're having a great time in the simulation, and you're there for 5 whole years. You start to get bored with it. You leave the simulation, you wake up, and you come back here into the real world, and you find out that only a half an hour's gone by for those 5 years you've been in the simulation. This is where we're going with Moore's Law. And in a way, it's kind of out of control. Each and one of us, we can fantasize about these ideas within the realm of possibility, probably within the next 20 years, at the speed of Moore's Law progressing. Like I told you where we were 20 years ago when I got my first computer. We were basically playing games like Pong. And now, games like GTA 5, they're old ones. People are waiting for the newest ones to come out, which are probably going to be that much better and that much more sophisticated, as these companies, there's big money involved here, are moving fast toward this creating these simulated environments, and every year they're coming out with new what's the name for it? These engines, they call them engines. These computer engines that create a real-time environment that simulates physics. Physics simulations of physics. So there's laws of physics in our universe, and they're simulating these laws of physics. Thank you guys for listening to my show. I know this show's a little bit out there, but out there only in the sense that we haven't really seen what they can do just yet. And you're going to see it. I mean, you guys have seen a lot just in the past few years. Right now, my cell phone is 100 times more powerful than my first computer was. And my first computer was like, took up the whole trunk of my car. It and the speakers and stuff, you know. And the monitor to come with it. Big CRT monitor and everything. It took up the whole trunk of my car. Now my cell phone's 100 times more powerful. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. And we'll catch you guys in the very next show. Bye-bye.